Hi, and welcome along to North Lodge. The rose I'm going to talk to you about today is absolutely perfect if you're gardening in a small space, if you're gardening on a patio or on a terrace and you want to keep a rose in a pot. This beautiful rose is Vanessa Bell. Bred and introduced by David Austin Roses in 2017 and obviously named after Virginia Woolf's sister. Vanessa Bell is a really very delicate little rose, staying very much in her lane and doing exactly as she is expected to do. I've been growing this rose here at North Lodge for around 7 or 8 years. It came with us from our last house. I had it as soon as it was launched and it has always been incredibly reliable. The bush itself always stays very small and very compact, which is why I'm suggesting this is a perfect rose for you to be growing in a pot or a container or in a small space. It literally never reaches anything more than around 3.5 feet, and in my experience here growing it in the garden for so long, never really reaches more than around 2.5 feet across. A great point of interest to note with Vanessa Bell is it's always one of the very first roses in bloom. It normally goes Vanessa Bell, Princess Anne, Olivia Rose Austin and the Lady Salisbury. Those are normally the first 4 that we have in bloom here in the North Lodge cottage garden, but Vanessa Bell is normally the first of those, not with a smattering of blooms, but very big full show of blooms right at the very beginning of June. Actually this year she actually broke bud right at the very end of May. The blooms themselves, if we just take one of these out and show you, the blooms themselves in bud form are tinged with pink and peach around the outside. This very lovely sort of spiralling effect to the petals right in the centre of the flower. The foliage, I know this sounds a really silly thing to say, but the foliage on this particular plant is very soft. It's very pale green, almost lime green, so a very light hue to the entire plant. That then paired with this very beautiful soft yellow flower gives the entire thing a really fresh, really citrusy look to the plant. Really lush, especially at this time of year, very early on in June. The blooms, as you can see, are very deeply cupped, packed absolutely full with petals, and they are the softest of yellow creams. As the bloom opens, it is quite yellow, sort of a buttercream colour, much as you would expect butter or margarine to be, and as the bloom fully opens, goes completely very pale cream, almost white as it fades. The blooms themselves are borne individually, as you can see here, normally one bloom to a stem, sometimes like this one here in pairs. This particular plant will have one very heavy flush of flowers right at the very beginning of the season. I say normally in very late May to beginning of June, it'll have an abundance of blooms for several weeks. It will then take a little break and have a smattering of flowers all the way through the summer. Nothing that I would ever say is a proper repeat or another complete show until it's taken a little bit of a break and regained its some strength, and then it has another flowering normally in July. The blooms are quite large, and this is one of the reasons why I think this plant sometimes suffers. The blooms for the size of plant, as you can see, are around 3 to 3.5 inches across, and if you grow Rose Roald Dahl, the size and shape of blooms, the characteristics and the way they're born are very similar to that of Roald Dahl, which is another great rose for growing in a pot. The scent on this, I don't really pick up a huge amount from this, but everybody's noses are very different, so this is all very circumspect. But it is very light, it's very fresh. There's small notes of citrus, lemons, limes, and green tea. If you've ever experienced picked green tea, that sort of very fresh, clean edge that you would find in perfumes that are normally associated with green or lemon tea. But a very beautiful and very delicate little rose that kicks off the very beginning of National Rose Month. Very pretty, as I say, producing 2 very good distinctive shows of blooms, one very early on in the season and the other one later on in July. The only problem with this particular rose is I found over the years that it is a little bit susceptible to black spot and leaf drop, and I really do think this is down to the size of the bloom that the actual plant produces. I think it lacks a little bit of vigour, i.e. it doesn't really have the strength to support such a huge flush of these really quite large flowers for a plant that really is fairly small. I'm going to try this year and give it a good liquid feed after its first flush of flowers, just as those are coming to an end and just as I'm deadheading it, to give it a little bit of a break. I'm hoping that's going to prevent a lot of the problems that I normally get with this plant. But it doesn't matter what season it is, whether it's damp or whether it's warm or whether it's hot or whether it's relatively cool. Vanessa Bell for me always does suffer with a little bit of black spot and therefore normally drops its leaves. So I'm going to be careful with this particular plant this year and see whether I can be a little more attentive to it. Now, if you're growing that in a pot and it's not competing with other plants in the border, because mine is planted in a border, it may actually perform a little better. It does shake it off, and after several weeks it regains itself, and as I say, has a smattering of blooms through the main part of the summer, but going fairly quiet according to the rose garden, and then another very distinctive flush of flowers in July. But Vanessa Bell is a really very beautiful, delicate, very soft yellow-white rose. Not a great deal of scent, but a fantastic rose for kicking off the very beginning of the season.